If you have a nasty reaction when you see a difficult fraction, sit and watch this video, 'cause I really want to show what you need to know about fractions. What is the fraction of the total number of fish that are red? Let's start by counting the total number of fish. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 7 fish in total. That number goes on the bottom line of the fraction. Now let's count the number of red fish. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 red fish. That number goes on the top of the fraction. 4 out of 7 of the fish are red, or 4/7. Fractions are easy, aren't they?
Now let's try to multiply.
It may seem a little weird, but multiplying and dividing fractions is actually easier than adding or subtracting them. Just 2 easy steps and you're done. To multiply 2 fractions, multiply the numerators, or the numbers on top, to get the numerator of the answer. Then multiply the denominators, or the numbers on the bottom, to get the denominator of the answer. In this case, the answer is 6 over 35. Sometimes, when you multiply or divide fractions, you may be able to reduce the answer to the lowest terms. As a rule, math people are crazy about reduced fractions, and teachers sometimes take points off a right answer if you could have reduced it but didn't. When multiplying fractions, you can often make the job easier by canceling out equal factors in the numerator and denominator. That makes the numbers that you're multiplying smaller and easier to work with, and it also saves you the trouble of reducing at the end.
Now we know what fractions are. And we know how to multiply fractions. Let's try a few more examples to make sure we understand. How do we multiply a fraction by a fraction? Multiplying fractions is actually a lot easier than adding or subtracting fractions. To multiply 2 fractions together, all you need to do is multiply across to multiply the numerators together, and then multiply across the bottom to multiply the denominators together. In this example, we'd multiply the 2 and the 5 together to multiply our numerators, and then the 3 and the 7 to multiply our denominators, to get our final answer of 10 over 21. Remember, when multiplying fractions, you do not need to change to a common denominator. Sometimes in fractions, we can reduce the numbers in the fractions to make the fractions easier to work with, and therefore easier to multiply. If any numerator has a divisor in common with its opposite denominator, then we can cancel out that common divisor to simplify the numbers and make our multiplication easier. Let's look at the example listed below to show how common divisors can help to simplify fractions. 8 and 16 have a common divisor, which is 8 itself. That is to say, 8 and 16 can both be divided by 8 with an even answer. 9 and 15 also have a common divisor, 3. 9 and 15 can be divided by 3 and get 3 and 5, which are even answers. 8 divided by 8 is 1. 9 divided by 3 is 3. So our simplified 8/9 is now 1/3. 15 divided by 3 is 5. 16 divided by 8 is 2. That turns 15/16 into 5/2. Now remember, we can't use this when fractions are on their own. We can only use this when we're working with a pair of fractions to multiply them. To recap that last step, which can be a little confusing, consider it read as this. 8 goes into 8 once. That covers the top left corner. 8 goes into 16 2 times. That would be the bottom right corner, and that takes out the divisor of 8 and 16. 3 goes into 9 3 times. 3 goes into 15 5 times. That takes out 9 and 15's common divisor of 3. With those two simplified fractions, we can now multiply across the numerator as we did in the beginning of this video, and that would be 1 times 5 is 5, and then multiply across the denominator as we did before, and that'd be 3 times 2, which gives us 6, meaning our final answer is 5 over 6. Simplifying the fractions at the beginning of the problem makes the multiplication you have to do much easier. It also eliminates the need for you to reduce your answer at the end of the problem. Think of our simple answer that we got in our last example, 5/6. Imagine getting 5/6 from having to mess with 8 times 15 and 9 times 16. Those numbers are a lot harder than just multiplying 1 times 5 and 3 times 2, which you can do in your head. And 1 times 5 and 3 times 2 don't need to be reduced after you multiply. All right, we've got one more problem. And this time, the numbers are a little harder because we have 3 fractions we're multiplying together. But don't get too scared, it's still the same process. All right, now what's our first step when we're multiplying fractions? That's right, we check and see if we can simplify. Do you see any numbers that can be reduced to a simpler form in this problem? No, not this time. So let's move on to step 2 of multiplying fractions. Now that we've checked to make sure that we can't simplify our problem, let's move on to our second step. What is our second step after we finish simplifying? Yes, you got it! Multiply across. First you multiply across the numerator, and then you multiply across the bottom for the denominator. Remember, the numerators are the numbers that fall above the line of the fraction, and the denominators fall beneath the line. All right, now that we reviewed that, let's go ahead and see what our answer is going to be. All right, we're finally to that part of the problem where we actually multiply numbers together. Remember, multiplying fraction happens in 2 parts, across the numerator and across the denominator. In order to multiply the numerators together in this problem, we get 1 times 3 times 5, which gives us 15 for our answer's numerator. Then we want to multiply our denominators together. That leaves us with 2 times 4 times 7, which gives us 56 for our answer's denominator. That means our final answer is 15 over 56. Is that what you got too? Great job! See, I told you you'd be a pro at fractions. We've learned what fractions are. We've learned how to multiply fractions. Now let's learn how to divide them.
We're dividing fractions, dividing fractions. We're dividing fractions. I can do it, you can do it, he can do it, she can do it. Now you take your fractions and line them up side by side. Then you flip your second fraction, the one you want to divide by. Then the numerator times the numerator you multiply. Then the denominator times the denominator you multiply. Take your fractions and line them up side by side. Then you flip your second fraction, put your bottom number on the top, top number on the bottom. Then the numerator times the numerator you multiply. Then the denominator times the denominator you multiply. Then reduce to simplest form. Then reduce to simplest form. Then reduce to simplest form. Then reduce to simplest form.
Dividing fractions is just as easy. In fact, when you divide fractions, you really turn the problem into multiplication. Start by turning the second fraction, or the divisor, upside down, making it into a reciprocal fraction. For example, 4/5 becomes 5/4. Then, change the division sign to a multiplication sign and multiply the fractions across. Here, we get 5/12. And that's the basics of multiplying and dividing fractions.